Greetings, Mark Garang here, publisher of the Conway Daily Sun, and today my guests are Sarah Eastman and Karen Cummings, who have put together a very exciting and interesting book, a compilation, some of the best stories from the Mountaineer. Sarah, hello.
Hello.
Karen.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good.
Yeah, we good?
We're excited.
We're excited. So we have a cover of the book. If you just want to flash that up for a second. And thanks. And just to, we're going to talk about it. But we also want to mention right at the top here that you have an event coming on next Friday, the 22nd, at the M&D Theater, which is the old Eastman Slope House. And some of the authors are going to be there from the stories that are in the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they'll be talking about sort of some of the fun times of working at the Mountaineer, or different or strange times. And then they will also talk about the thrill of getting to interview a lot of these people.
Sure.
So a lot of them are not still around.
Yeah, so we'll talk about them. Just to recap, so people, I mean, time goes on. But Sarah, I mean, it was Steve and Jane Golden who originally founded it. You married Steve. You guys ran the whole thing for 3 decades, basically. The paper, you sold the paper. You and Steve sold the paper in 2005.
2005.
And then Steve died in
2008.
2008. And it was sold, and that was really the heyday. I mean, when you guys had it, that was the heyday of the Mountaineer. And it was sold to Salmon Press, which was a big organization that bought a bunch of weeklies around this half of the state. And then, and didn't do, absentee owner, didn't do very well. And Mountaineer finally went away in 2014. But back in the day, like the real back in, and Karen, so obviously, Sarah, you were involved with it for all those years, raising kids and publishing papers and doing all that, all the events. And Karen, you were a reporter mostly in the 1980s for the Mountaineer?
Off and on. Steve always hired me back, no matter where I went. He would hire me back, off and on between 83 and 1995.
Okay. So, and then you actually worked in Boston, Dana-Farber, and now you moved back here. And by the way, you have a daughter that people know. Who is that?
Well, one of the things that's funny about it is when I worked for the Mountaineer, my daughter Laura Cummings would introduce herself as my daughter. And now, because she owns White Birch Books, I introduce myself as her mother.
Ah, yes. Time does go along.
Yes.
And the Mountaineer, you know, it's funny how things come together. And the Mountaineer really captured the sort of the whole baby boomer vibe of the 1980s in general, and also, but particularly here, right? I mean, this is when the Ben Williams started the Horse Feathers. I mean, it was all, you know, the Mud Bowls. I mean, Steve started the Mud Bowl with help, of course. And so that was really the time for that was the Mountaineers' time, don't you think? The 80s, 90s.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Ben Williams and Brian were the first Ear of the Year award. So if we started the paper in '76, that was 1977 that they got the Ear of the Year award, which is done out in January. We look at all the stories that we've done throughout the year, and well, just like the Conway Daily Sun does, and figure out what is the most important story for the whole community, the whole valley.
So it's quite a time, and that's when Volvo came. And I should say, there's another connection, Tom Eastman. I mean, Tom was the right-hand man, obviously Steve's brother, for all those years, and then he came to work. We were lucky enough to, when he left the Mountaineer, and now he's still here. And so his old resort report is now Valley Voice, but it's still Tom, you know, talking about cultural things, the events and music and all that. So, and even Patty Tilton, one of our graphic designers, said she worked for the Mountaineer in the 80s when you guys were located north of here, and then you built the building in Conway, right?
In Conway, correct.
And that's H.E. Bergeron, I think, has
Sean
that now.
bought it
Sean
from
knows,
us.
yeah. Anyway, enough of that history. Just want to give a little perspective. So the book, I mean, how would you, either one of you, describe what the Mountaineer's purpose was, or mission was, editorial mission?
Well, actually, Jane Golden put it very well. I'm still friendly with her. She's Jane Golden Riley. And she said it was the tourist paper for locals.
Huh, that's an interesting take, but it's a little bit of a mind bender, but it's true.
Yes, I mean, people, I mean, tourists read it to
Right.
find out what was going on, but locals did too. And, you know, getting into the resort report was,
Back in the day, it was
back in the day, was a big deal. And when I stood in line to vote in Freiburg, I was talking to Sheila Duane, and she was saying that, oh, she looked forward to every week getting the paper, reading the resort report, you know, checking out what was going on, and then going to Horse Feathers and meeting up with everybody. You know, that was sort of what we did.
Yeah, Steve's intention was never to be a hard news kind of newspaper. If we had a daily like yourself, we would obviously, but over the years he did have a piece called Ear to the Ground, and that was, you know, bits and pieces of what he thought were the most important news items, and we did them in depth. Yeah, but it was mostly a fun EAR, entertainment, arts, recreation, and
Yeah.
the pulse of the valley.
And it captured the culture, but I mean, one is that you guys did do news, because I remember reading the, you know, planning board stories and that kind of thing. Now, not being a daily, you didn't do the car crashes, and it's not so much unless it was something big. But also, and it was really kind of, I think Tom's bailiwick is the history. I mean, it wasn't just a contemporary culture, but capturing the history. And Karen, you've written many of those stories as well.
Right.
But that was a big part of the year.
And we also had Gabrielle Griswold. She did wonderful historical stories. We had a whole team of wonderful writers, and Rob Burbank is going to be there on Friday, next Friday, and Chris Stewart is going to be there remotely. Riley is going to be there remotely. Tom, obviously, Ann Bennett, and who am I forgetting? But we're going to have about 5 or 6.
We're going to have 4 real people and, and 2 Zooms.
Two avatars, right? The
Yes,
Zooms.
yes.
Very good. So the
So
go
one,
ahead.
One
No,
thing
go.
to mention is that Steve wanted to write a book. Once he sold the paper, you can tell.
Well, he didn't just want to write a book.
Or put together a book.
He wanted to put together, I think his vision was a coffee table book, which today wouldn't work at all. But he was a real creative thinker and an imaginer, and so his concept, and this was when after he was diagnosed, he wanted a purpose. He wanted to be productive, and so he wanted to create the White Mountain Institute, and of that was going to be 4 books. One of them was going to focus on the social and cultural history. One of them was going to focus on Mount Washington. One of them was going to focus on the ski industry. And the last one was going to focus on the greatest generation. And so it was going to be 4 books using the 30 years of stories that we had compiled. But beyond that, he wanted a White Mountain Institute where people would come, say, to the AMC for a weekend conference on Mount Washington. There would be thematic things. He also wanted to reach out to the school-age kids, very similarly to what they do for the ski history.
Sure.
He thought, you know, which ages would be good for these particular stories. And so he had a real broad vision of what he wanted to do. Unfortunately, that didn't come to pass, but early on when he was talking about doing this book, he talked with Mike Dickerman, and Mike Dickerman was all for it, and Mike Dickerman was our second publisher that we approached. The first one didn't work out, but we approached Mike, and he said, no, you know, I'm retired from publishing.
And he's published a lot of local history books.
Yes,
and all that. Yeah.
and hiking books,
and
a lot of
climber and all
hiking
that,
books.
yeah.
And
Well, he had announced before that he was retired. And then actually Laura, my daughter, talked to him, and he was like, no, I'm not going to publish, no. And then he said, have them call me. And he's been a wonderful help to put this together.
So what does that mean when he published it? I mean, you obviously, let's talk about that. So let's start with how I mean, every week, what I recall from the Mountaineer, you always had one big cover story, right? It was, well, I guess it was written by a host. I always think of Tom, because Tom's here, and he still does the same thing for us, believe it or not. Mostly our Saturday features, he does. very well. And then there was the rest of the news and all the stuff that we've talked about. So, 30 years of stories, that's 30 times 50, it's 1,500, it's a lot of stories. So how did you call them out?
Well, we first started, my idea, first of all, Karen called me up in January and said, I think we should write a book on the Mountaineer. And I said, are you crazy? And we talked about it, we discussed it. And so we came up with a concept of what's the premise? We want the book to tell the story of how the Mount Washington Valley evolved to what it is today, or during that time period. And what were the important stories? Who were the important people that created a very unique community called the Mount Washington Valley? And if you read about the early stories that we have, and then what I call the movers and shakers, the Harvey Dow Gibson, the Carol Reeds, that kind of thing, there's a connecting thread. Every single one of those people or events, it was a compassion for the community. They wanted to help out the community. And I think that spirit of giving is still very much alive. And so that's how we started the paper. And that gave us a starting point for, okay, let's do 5 chapters. What's going to be in the 5 chapters? It took a lot of conversations.
And you had I'm going to interrupt you for a second, but just in terms of like, to find these stories, for one thing, your attic must be full of, somebody had all the old mountaineers, right? You had them all. So did you literally, that's the only place, well, you started, to back up just a minute, actually the Sun helped you start a website.
Yes.
So you were starting that process anyway, right? And that website's still up, and it's called what? White Mountain Chronicles?
Yeah, or Mountaineer Chronicles.
I'm sorry, Mountaineer Chronicles. And
Yeah,
so that's
MT Ear
right.
Chronicles.
So you had started editing stories, because I know we were part of that years ago.
Yes.
Right.
So we started out with a big long list of, oh, that's a great story. That's a good person, and then we sort of narrowed it down into the chapters that we felt would flow and tell the story. But then we also wanted to have something relatively contemporary to talk about, like you were saying, the baby boomers, the fun generation that was, with things like Mud Bowl, Spring Champagne Stampede.
Right.
Anybody that did that remembers.
Sure.
Local yokels.
Yeah, local yokels,
Yeah,
which evolved into Mountain
Mountain
Meisters,
Meisters.
and that's still around. So we wanted to show more of the valley, because that's what the Mountaineer did. It really covered fun things and the history. So
Yeah, so I'm going to put you on the spot. What are the 5 chapters?
Karen? Well, if you
There we
really
go.
want to know,
Yeah.
the early innkeepers brought art and tourism to the valley. So it's Pinkham Notch, Crawford Notch. And Karen's passion was how they got here with Concord coaches laying the rails in the mountains, which was quite amazing. They made a difference. Those are the Harvey Dow Gibsons and the Carol Reeds, Stoney and Morrill.
actually, I think there's 6 chapters, because how they got here wasn't going to be a chapter.
Oh,
Okay, so let's, go ahead.
and then colorful characters. There are so many. And Tom has met so many of them and can write an entire book about the colorful characters. And then there's EAR, Entertainment, Arts, and Recreation. And the last chapter is unique to the valley. Things that only happen in the Mount Washington Valley. So.
Now, like what?
Oh, you want us to give you all of our
Well,
secrets?
like the Redstone Quarry. I mean, reading, that was the Chris Stewart story. Reading about, and he interviewed someone who worked there, which is very interesting. But reading about that made me want to travel around the country and see the amazing buildings where the granite from the Redstone Quarry, Washington, D.C.,
DC, sure.
Philadelphia, Chicago, because he's got that all in the story. But then the interview with this person who worked there. Another thing is limmer boots.
Unique
which
for
is-
sure. Yeah.
Yes,
Unique.
which Jane Golden wrote, and it
Still here.
It's still here, and it really stands up.
Yeah.
Laura at the White Birch Book says those are the two topics people ask for more than anything else.
Really?
I want some information on limber boots. I want some information on the Redstone Quarry.
Really?
So
I mean,
we
I can see
knew-
the Redstone Quarry, but the limber boots, I guess, a legend in its own time with hiking boots and
Yeah,
They're
all that.
worldwide.
yeah.
Yeah.
Popularity.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So when you did your tour for the looking at different cities and the granite, did you go and chip a piece of
Oh,
granite
no, I
off?
said I wanted to, but I haven't done it yet.
It's like going to
but
baseball parks. You go to granite buildings. around
Yes,
the country.
I'm definitely, definitely, next time I go down to DC, I'm going to,
Yeah. So we got a couple of photos, Rob. Let's see. Speaking of the Wayback, let's put it in the Wayback machine here. So, what are we looking at?
we're looking at Harvey Dow Gibson going up the ski-mobile. He's the one that bought Cranmore and then handed it over and brought Hannah Schneider here. The story of what Harvey Dow Gibson did for the valley, and if you notice, I just noticed there's a building at Freiburg Academy that they just repainted that was the early gym, and now it's the music room, but it's the Gibson building,
Huh.
and it's 100 years old.
Wow. And we know that this Gibson Center, I mean, he did a lot. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
whole story about
The community center.
And,
So
and
many
Tom
things.
wrote the book on Cranmore, which is a lot about getting Hannah Schneider out of pre-war Germany and all that. And his house, isn't his house at the end, in the middle of North-South Road here by the Carriers, right? Is that where it was?
No.
Where is it?
No,
I
I
don't-
don't.
Isn't it the house next to the old Carol Reed?
I think so.
To
I think
the-
it's
Up
the
here?
Yellow
Yeah.
Woodbury building.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right, anyway, so
But he started out as a janitor. It's a very interesting story.
we'll have to read it.
You'll have to read the book.
We got to keep some of the secrets.
Yeah.
All right, what else? Oh, okay, we're looking at, looks like Frankenstein's trestle. Is that right?
It's not Frankenstein
not.
Trestle, it's a different one.
Oh,
But it's,
what's that building in the back?
isn't that the,
Okay, I'm sorry. What are we looking at?
anyway, the story of how they built the train going up through Crawford Notch is another one of the very interesting
That's not the
stories.
trestle?
You have to look it up.
Okay,
in the
well,
book.
that's another secret. See, this is why I'm
Yeah.
just trying to.
Yeah.
There are two figures in that photo, if you notice. There's one, it looks like a lady with a dress on and hat, and there's one right in front of the train.
Oh,
so,
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
This is a Mike Dickerman photo that he got for us.
Okay.
So,
And this is funny. I mean, it's so funny because there used to be the bank, right, in the background, which is the Met now.
The
yeah.
Met.
And then what was the, and that's Rick Lutzka in the middle there, who used to be a sales rep for you guys and then for us for years. And who else is in that photo? And this is in the 80s, right? This has got to be in the 80s.
This is in the 80s. I think this is 1983 or 4, and I'm next to Rick, and then Tom Dean and his
Wife.
first wife and
Annette.
and I do not remember the person
I
who's
think
in the
her
foreground
name
there.
is Clarissa. maybe?
Okay,
Clarissa,
and then
yeah.
we had a power outage, so we're going to pick it up with Sarah Eastman and Karen Cummings. So we're back. All right. So one thing is, we were talking a few things sitting here in the dark while the power was out, but Tom had done through the years 1976 to 2006, which is a little bit of a precursor to the book. And this was done. The paper was sold in 2005, and it was like his homage to the mountaineer history, right? And so, and he used, and the name of your book is Through the Ears, and he did his piece called Through the Ears too. So it's always nice to continue that tradition, I guess.
Well, we thought, I mean, it's the perfect title,
yeah.
and so
Yeah, it lends itself.
we stole it.
Yeah, okay, I didn't want to say it that way, but but it is the perfect title.
We did ask him, didn't we?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But we had several other ideas we
Yeah.
had, but we thought that was the most
Right.
appropriate one.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's very nice. So you had you had lots of stories, hundreds of stories to choose from. We talked about, you whittled down to the 6 chapters, I guess. And then with each story, like how did the writing style change, or did you notice that it changed? Has it held up 30 years? Because I know you've edited them down somewhat. We all know Tom Eastman, and he can write pretty long.
Well, a lot of the stories we had to edit because things had changed, or else people had passed away. So we had to somehow put that in.
Oh, that they died.
Yes, we, you know, we did say that, you know, they're dead. They're all dead. Actually, there's a few people that are still alive, but almost everybody that we're getting the information from are no longer with us. Which is, in a way, I hope it continues people's knowledge of them. You know.
Yeah, and just looking through just quickly is that, you know, in Tom's in the paper back in 2006 is that the Mountaineer set a bridge, and of course this is generational for every generation. But you know, there was like Mackenzie, the guy who was at the top of the mountain in 1931 with the you know, the highest, recording the highest wind velocity, and all those type of people. They were older in the 80s and 90s, and that's what you're referencing, and they're gone.
Yes.
You know, Bob Morrell, big part of it.
Oh yeah.
You know,
I
all
mean,
those people.
I moved up here originally in the 70s because I loved the area because I used to get the Carol Reed catalog. So to be able to sit down and interview Carol Reed,
Sure.
it was just amazing.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different stories in there of these people that lived through this amazing era, and they're quoted.
Yeah, and you said that off camera, we were waiting in the dark, about how the photos, when Salmon Press took over the paper, the Mountaineer, they were thrown out basically. So how did you reconstruct some of those photos for the book?
Well, we also had to throw out the negatives because they were all moldy after 25 years. So we really didn't have anything to go by, but from that last issue there, Tom had a whole disc of pictures that we could choose from, and we did use some of those in the book. We did use a couple of original Mountaineer photos from the paper that you were able to scan and get a higher resolution on. But generally speaking, we had to go around the valley and ask lots of people, and Mike Dickerman did give us many of his, or loan us many of his. I mean, Shirley Alcott from the Five and Dime, she took a photo right off the, or from her scrapbook, I think.
She's on the cover.
Oh, yeah.
I went to the Conway Historical Society, was very helpful with photos. Also, one of my favorite stories, Rolling the Roads, the Freiburg Historical Society found photos for
And
that.
you said the Rolling the Roads, that's when they had the snow, the big rollers to roll the snow and pack the snow, right? And I think you remember years ago you told me, what's the backstory to that story? Isn't there something funny about that guy or something?
Oh, well, he just said it was the most awful job in the world. I mean, that was my lead sentence in the story, which is in here. He was born in 1899. So interviewing someone that was born in a different century was very neat. He was in a small cabin in West Freiburg, was where he lived, and just the story, it was fascinating.
Why did they roll the roads?
Because they had sleighs. They didn't have, they rolled the roads and they didn't plow them. And they even, early on with cars, they would just put them up for the winter. You know.
And the quote that I remember, it's the quickest way to kill a horse.
Yes.
And pull those pieces
rollers.
the rollers.
Yes.
So speaking of that, what's, Sarah, do you have a favorite story? Or a couple favorite stories? What are your favorites?
Oh gosh, you know, I just love the whole chapter on the people who I feel really made a difference in the valley. The Harvey Doug Gibsons, Carol Reeds, Bob Morrell. Yeah, that chapter I think really touches my heart, because I think that kind of generosity is still here in different people and different events. And of course, the fun chapter.
Yeah.
So
those are my two favorite areas.
Yours, Karen?
I like the story about the artists bringing, well, actually, the artists bringing the tourists, that how that worked. But then the Chris Stewart's story about the cops of Crawford Notch, famous quote, 50 years is long enough to spend with any man.
Well, say that. Put reference to that.
Yeah.
His wife decided
Dolly
to leave
Cop.
him after.
Dolly Cop. Oh, you said
Dolly.
the cops. Dolly Cop. From
Dolly
Dolly
Cop.
Cop Campground.
Yes.
Okay, yes. So go ahead.
And so after 50 years, she decided that was enough to be with him, and
She left.
And she left.
Yeah.
No divorce, just she left.
Yeah, that's the way it
Yes.
should be.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is amazing look back through history, and you know, and I guess we're all baby boomers, right? So that's we're that generation, and how do you think the Valley? You know, it's certainly a topic of everybody's, you know, dinner table about what's happened in the Valley, good or bad. What do you guys think? How much has it changed, good or bad?
Well, I don't know. I think it has too many hotels, but it doesn't have quite the character that it used to have back in the day. And I can remember talking to somebody about the Spring Champagne Stampede when we all ran around like crazy people in the street, and they were saying, could never do that now. We would all get killed.
Right. Because explain, I know a lot of people aren't going to know what that is. So Sarah, what was the Spring Champagne Stampede?
Well, Steve, always thinking of the Valley, they had either 1 or 2 snowless winters. And mud season is a tough season to get through when you haven't had much snow and much skiing. And so he thought, let's create a fun event. People will look forward to it. It'll be a community event. And this Spring Champagne Stampede, SSS, it was born. And it took so much work by people like Ben Williams, Lydia Lansing. They spent hours and hours and weeks up on top of horse feathers, the 2nd floor, trying to figure out the clues.
Because the idea was that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the idea was there was a group of people and they dressed up in costumes, which was that costume that with the ostriches there that we showed earlier, and they would follow clues, but they were all local clues. I mean, you had to know the local events, people, places, history to find them, right?
Yeah, the parameters were, I think, the northernmost point was Memorial Hospital, the southernmost point was Bob and Terry's. And those are the parameters. So every single team had to have a runner, someone who's really good. And the other people were thinkers and maybe knew the history. And, you know, some of the clues were so obscure. It was just amazing that a team won every year. And so...
It was a scavenger hunt.
It was a scavenger. But
Yeah,
George
scavenger
Cleveland
hunt.
was involved with that too, right? Didn't he do that?
Yes.
He was part of that.
Yes.
Because I remember, and I wasn't either around then or didn't participate probably, but it seemed like because then you find a bottle of champagne. Is that what it was? A case of champagne.
A case
but
of
wasn't
champagne.
one of them in the post office box here at the corner? I thought that was...
Well, you get a certificate that you won, but then you give that to Steve and the rest of them, and then they declare you the winner and give you a case of champagne. And so here's one of the final clues. The final clues, they got harder and harder. What was the speed limit on the Appian Way?
On the what way?
Appian Way. You being a Renaissance man should know something.
I don't know about that. Okay.
So the answer was?
The answer was LVO.
LVO.
LBO's
LBO's
pizza.
LVOs. Wow.
So
Those are tough.
That's how tough
Yeah.
the clues were. So.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
But
Well,
it was such a fun community event.
Yeah.
It really was. And I can't tell you how many people have begged us to start this again. And I said, it's just impossible. You couldn't possibly do it. The police wouldn't allow it. There were police around, but there were so few people on the streets during mud season.
Right.
It was easy to keep people
I mean,
safe.
people forget how. I mean, now spring is still the mud season, even though there's really not a lot mud around. Doesn't seem like, but back in those days, it really did shut down. Because I think you guys, the Mountaineer, took a couple of weeks off actually in the spring.
We did.
I mean, it was just nothing going on.
Yeah. And generally speaking, except for the ski area, the winter was very, very dead around here.
Right.
So times have changed
Yeah, that's for sure.
so much.
Yeah. And I have to admit, I'm probably one of the only people in town that those hotels don't bother me. And not even the one at the Scenic Vista, which I know everybody hates. Now that it's got white clapboard on, you know, there used to be a Grand Hotel there. Did they complain about it back in the 1800s? I don't know. Anyway, it's another topic.
Oh, yes.
Southern
Okay. Yeah.
But it has changed a lot. So you think, but it's, I mean, and it's, when all these development issues come up, we had, of course, have letters and all that, and someone said, I came here in 2008, and it has changed so much since then. Well, in 2008, 10 years prior, that was before Home Depot was here. So 5 years before that, before Home Depot and Lowe's and they all showed up, people were saying the same thing. But if you arrive in 2008 and the Home Depot is here, that's your new frame of reference, right? So is it not the same now? Like, people are still dying to live here, and they think it's charming and all that. And I mean, we're in North Conway, and I think, the people who take care of North Conway would think the village is still charming.
Well, there's a paper that Carol Reed had from the 50s. I don't know which newspaper it was from. And they were complaining about the traffic in North Conway, and they said a bypass has to be built somehow. So that was back in the 50s. How many decades did it take to get the bypass in the North-South Road?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
change takes time.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, so
good.
let's remind people, so the event is next Friday
November 22nd
at the M&D Theater.
at Eastern Slope Playhouse.
All right,
yes.
and what's going to happen? And it's 7 o'clock, right?
7 o'clock.
7
Yes.
o'clock it starts. Well, one of the Eastern Slope, the M&D Playhouse is hosting us. We're going to have several of the writers. Jane Golden, who was a co-founder, will be on Zoom, and Chris Stewart will also be on Zoom to talk. We hope people come. We hope people share stories. We expect the writers to talk about maybe the favorite people that they interviewed, some of the fun things that happened at the ear, and just what it was like to write for the ear, just what the town was like then. And we want both new residents, they can come in and learn.
Sure.
And there will be a signature drink called the Resort Report. We have no idea what's going to be in it.
There will also be Mountaineer covers from over the years. We had a show about 5 years ago at Settlers Green, and it was popular. And we have some small matted prints of the covers and some larger ones, and we'll have them for sale if anyone is interested in buying those.
Okay, well, very good. And and Steve, I wouldn't say he was a mentor because we were competing, and he's not that much older than me, but it's almost been 20 years since he's passed, isn't it? It's amazing. And and he was such a one of the things I learned from him, he was such a hands-on guy, right? And because I know he would help deliver the papers, when they came out on Thursdays. And, and we have, for the magazines, not the daily paper, because, there's a lot of papers, a lot of stops, but I deliver the magazines to the grocery stores because we go through so many and I have a pickup truck. And I often think of Steve, when people say, you're doing that? What are you doing that? Don't you have somebody do that? I said, well, it's tradition. So, anyway, good to see you guys.
Nice to
All
see
right,
you,
take
too.
care.
very
Hope
much.
to see you on the event.
Okay. Thanks, Rob.
Okay.